Hi, Papa, I'm recording. Okay, first question. What was your first job?
My first job, which was a real job, was I worked on two farms. I worked for Otto Stein. He had 80 cows that needed to be milked every day. And I worked for Mr. Rehill, who had a gentleman's farm. And I think I learned the most from Mr. Rehill because when I was 13 years old, he had gone off to buy additional cows, more cattle. And we had, at that time, about 60 milkers that had to be milked every day. And Hurricane Carol was coming up the coast of East Coast and hit us pretty hard. It was probably one of the more devastating hurricanes. This was in 1953. And he was away. And the job taught me then the responsibility to be able to not only think on my feet, but understand my responsibilities towards the cows and the herd. So not only did we have to get the cows in out of the peril of the storm, but his wife and I had to milk the cows by hand because the power was off. And it was really very hard work. But the part of it that really registers with me today was that I couldn't shirk my responsibility to the animals and to Mr. Rehill because the cows had to be milked. And so it was a long day, a tedious day. The power was out for 3 days, and not only did we have to milk the cows, but we had to throw the milk away because there was no refrigeration. And the sense of responsibility towards the animals and knowing what the job was at a young age really taught me the whole business of why people count on you and what you're supposed to do when no one's there. And there were two cows that I was affectionate with. There's no, an animal can give you a love that you don't understand, that they're sharing it with you. But there was one cow, her name was Cora May, and she had stepped on one of her tits, and so she only had 3 milking. But you still had to strip that one that was missing because the milk would still fill the udder. And it was painful for Cora May. Even though there was stress because we had a lot of cows to milk, I had a relationship with this cow that stays with me to this day. I mean, I still remember her name. And I thought then, how important it was for me to not only do my job, but to make sure that I was thorough, that I went the distance. And so that was my first job, and I was paid $12 a week. And I worked probably better part of 70 hours a week on that farm. And Otto Stein had a similar situation. And when I got done with Mr. Rehill, because Mr. Stein was also in trouble because he didn't have help, after we took care of Rehill's cows, I would go over and help with. Now, all I can tell you is that job, though it didn't pay me in terms of money, it taught me a lot about responsibility and dedication to a commitment that somebody's made in you, that I needed to make sure that I didn't disappoint him even though he wasn't there. And so that was really my first job. After that, I had other jobs, but none were as rewarding as that first job. It wasn't the paycheck. I remember I used to have to take a bus all the way to this farm and then walk quite a distance to the farm. And I couldn't understand why nobody would sit next to me, but I smelled like the cows and the manure I was shoveling, and now I could laugh about it. But at that time, I was a little disappointed that nobody would sit near me on the bus because I smelled like the farm, and it was kind of humorous today, but it wasn't humorous then.
We can laugh about it now.
Yeah. So that was my first job.
Okay, question number 2. What skills were needed to do this job?
Well, everything was taught. You were taught in a prescribed manner what had to be done and when it had to be done. And so there was structure to this job. And even though it was agriculture, some things had to get done every day, regardless of the weather, regardless of the circumstance. And one of the things I used to remember that was important, we used to have to move the fence. The pasture was segregated so that we would give the cows fresh grass to eat every day, but we would only give them 10 yards. So we would have to move the fence early in the morning before we let the cows loose so that they would eat only in a prescribed area. We had it wired off. And the reason was that the cows would only eat the good grass. And you had to make sure that the cows ate all of the grass so that you could keep moving the fence. And they would always have a mixture of grass, great grass, and then the not so good grass. And that's kind of like life. You get the good grass, but you have to learn to live on some of the bad grass. And so I guess that was the lesson I learned from that. But that was one of those things that had to get done every day. And so that was the structure. So that's really what you learn from a job is what's the process, how do you get to the end, how do you finish the job, and that was what that first job was on. And remember, I'm 13 years old, so it's and I can recall it 60 years later as though it was yesterday. And those learning habits stay with you all your life. And I was fortunate to work for 2 men, and one was very old and one was not so old, that took the time to teach me not only what it was I was doing, but the responsibilities that they instilled in me. If they weren't going to do it, then I had to do it as though they were doing it. And that's kind of like hard for a 13-year-old at the time, but that's what I did.